Hello, dear friends of freedom. I decided to translate a short interview with Mikhail Podolyak. Mikhail is a highly intelligent Ukrainian politician, journalist, and negotiator who is serving as the advisor to the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. I believe there are not many people who are able to describe the essence of the Russian Empire so clearly and understandable. Let's take a look. We are talking with the anti-crisis advisor of the presidential office, Mikhail Podolyak. Mikhail, good evening. Good evening. It's hard to call the calls of Russian Minister of Defense Shoigu to foreign political leaders regarding the so-called dirty bomb anything else but hysterical. Russia has already declared that they are preparing a plan of action in the case of radioactive contamination which allegedly Ukraine could cause. How would you comment on that? Well, first of all, it was not only Shoigu who tried to reach out to other countries. It was also Chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, Valery Gerasimov. And in the morning, also Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who started to make similar announcements. He said that they will get in touch with the UN in order to bring this topic up in the United Nations Security Council, where they misuse their permanent position to push their informational campaigns. Last but not least, we have also Russian press speaker Peskov, who also started to claim that they have this information. So this is not just some hysteria by Shoigu, but a well-thought-through information campaign. Of course, it looks ridiculous, and it's obviously not based on any credible facts. But the synchronized, similar announcements from multiple high-ranking persons show that this is another Russian attempt to influence public perception, especially international public perception. Regarding their nuclear disinformation, first they failed with the nuclear power plant campaign, in which they warned that if Ukraine allegedly continues to bomb it, it could explode, etc. Then they also failed their information campaign regarding the Russian threat of using their strategic or tactical nuclear missiles against us. Their next attempt was to talk about the threat of blowing up the Kakhovka hydroelectric dam on the Dnepro river, but it of course looked very strange how Mr. Surovikin was talking about it. And after that, we have those new synchronized announcements about the alleged plans to use a dirty nuclear bomb. If anyone possesses just the smallest amount of logical thinking, they will not believe something like, look, they have lied all their way through 8 months of their so-called special operation, but now they surely must say the truth. How does the situation actually look like? Ukraine is on the offense, liberating more and more territory. Yes, Russia is currently still successfully holding the defense in certain areas due to their advantage in huge amounts of artillery shells and equipment and the use of newly mobilized recruits who might not be trained, but who show up in large quantities. Yet Ukraine is still moving forward and is still pushing them out of their territory, and this will continue. Secondly, Russia has tried to scare Ukraine by bombing its energy infrastructure. They are openly claiming that they want to freeze Ukraine by destroying their heating capabilities and make sure they have no electricity, so that we get scared and say, okay, we surrender and are ready to give you a part of our territory so you can continue to kill us. All of this wasn't working, and now they try to prove to the world that Ukraine, which is having an effective counteroffensive, which is effectively fighting with conventional weapons, which is effectively executing military operations, would suddenly decide to use an absolutely horrible weapon so that it would completely discredit itself in front of the entire world. There's not a single motive for Ukraine to do something like this, but those Russian-speaking characters come out and seriously announce that Ukraine, which is currently winning on the battlefield, is planning to use something that usually we would use as an army of Gopniks. This is what it looks like. As you and your partner have already mentioned, all of this is fiction, an absolute fake, and absolutely insignificant based on its underlying factual content, and we need to remind people of that. Mikhail, you know what I don't really understand is that the leadership of the Ministry of Defense of Russia should know by now that the whole world knows that they are compulsive liars. Now, 8 months of war have passed, 243 days, and they are like, let's try it once more, maybe it will work this time. To whom is that addressed to? To themselves? To their inner audience? Or to whom?
Еще попробуем, а вдруг прокатит, вдруг получится. На кого тогда это рассчитано? На самих себя, на свою внутреннюю аудиторию или на кого?
You are summing it up nicely, but there's just one nuance. If a person has an IQ of around 80, he often thinks that he is surrounded by idiots. This is the approximate IQ of the Foreign and Defense Ministry of the Russian Federation. In 22 years of Putin's regime, they have gotten used to thinking that everyone will listen to their absolute BS and think, ah, well, if the Russian Federation is officially announcing this, it must be true. They also developed the skill of believing their own propaganda. On the other hand, they got used to the fact that other countries kept closing their eyes in regards to Russia's deliberate and obvious lies and kept thinking that this is just the Russian way of diplomacy. And now they have fallen in their own trap. If they would at least have some sort of creative, prepared, and logical approach, if they would have more time to paint a more credible picture in which some sort of connection between cause and effect would be visible, this would at least be somewhat convincing. But now they seem to be unable to change their strategy. This would also be too much to ask from someone like Shoigu. You surely know what kind of person he is. This is a person who, before announcing mobilization, declares in a public interview, "Look, we are so successful on the battlefield, we have only 5,000 losses, which is practically nothing. We have such a large army. But you know what? We will have to mobilize 300,000 people," the moderator adds, so that those additional 300,000 people can get the chance to be part of this great success story. Yes, exactly. So it turns out that this man is sitting in front of the camera and in all seriousness declares that, "Look, we have only 5,000 losses. We invaded Ukraine with about 230,000 troops. We are such a great army that is able to destroy everyone." While their public speaker constantly announced that they are killing about 5 to 20,000 NATO soldiers a day, destroying tens of thousands of tanks and warplanes, and that everything in Ukraine is already destroyed. And Shoigu is getting interviewed, and nobody dares to ask him the obvious question, "So since you are such a military hero who already killed and destroyed so much over there, while only having 5,000 losses, why do you need the mobilization?" And Shoigu is just sitting there and thinking, well, since they are all idiots, they will believe me. This is the same concept as with the announcement of the dirty bomb. Just imagine, one of their idiots comes out and basically announces, "They are preparing to use a nuclear dirty bomb against us. Yes, they might press us from every direction and we are already running from our positions, but they just beat us so effectively that they for some reason decided to use a nuclear bomb against us, despite the fact that this would not solve any of their operational tactical tasks. Yes, we are the ones who are currently fleeing from the battlefield and the ones who are targeting civilian objects, but they are the ones who want to use the nuclear bomb." Another important point is that during Shoigu's announcement, he said that this will happen somewhere at the arsenal of the Russian army. So he basically suggested that they could use something to make a Russian nuclear weapon explode. This looks so incredibly ridiculous, but it's actually important that this looks ridiculous. Do you know why? As I always said, it is important that the rest of the world finally stops taking the Russian state or anything they announced seriously. It is important that the rest of the world, or at least our allies, finally stop thinking that they have to listen to what Russia is saying, and it is important that they understand that Russia needs to lose. Still, many of them believe there is a need to listen and to try to understand the Russian state. You know how many officials still keep suggesting that it is necessary to start negotiating with Russia again, or otherwise Russia might continue to escalate this conflict and so on? The host says, "Mikhail, regarding the strikes on critical infrastructure, it is clear what their intentions are. It is clear that they want to freeze Ukraine and create a wave of protest, resentment, and complaints, but they should see by now that this isn't working. Yes, we have serious damages. Yes, we have victims. And yes, we have blackouts. But in total, Ukraine is and will be handling this situation. So what are they hoping for? What is their logic behind it? You have to understand that you are able to reason logically as a modern human being. But they, the Kremlin, are Gopniks. This is a very fitting definition for them. A Gopnik, until he gets a punch in the face, will continue to cause harm, not because he has a certain goal, but because he can hurt you. So they are continuing to strike civilian infrastructure, even though they understand that the Ukrainians will not start demanding from their government to start making compromises with Russia and let Russia take whatever they want as long as they stop shooting at our heating systems. They understand perfectly that Ukraine is not Russia. Unlike in Russia, free people are living in Ukraine. They understand that. Yet they have this primitive Gopnik mentality. They are used to being referred to with fancy terms such as Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, or Russian Federation, while they live in their royal mansions and listen to their Soviet era anthems. So there is this impression that this is a powerful government, but in fact, they are just some ordinary criminal teenagers from the streets who are by now in their 50s or 60s. For them, the main thing is to cause damage, regardless of anything, as long as you don't pull them by their ear and punish them. Unfortunately, this is the problem of this current situation. In regards to them and their intellectual capabilities, their preparation for the war, their system of leadership, and their logistical basis, everything should be very clear by now. Yet the world cannot understand a crucial thing, that the idea of Russia being a strong state does not exist. This is just a small group of people who, by destroying all electoral procedures and all political competition, managed to maintain their monopoly on political leadership. But their political leadership is extremely primitive. Let's just strike the electrical transformer plants so that people don't have water and light. Take a look at how excited this then gets communicated in their state media. They are just some kind of monsters. This is incomprehensible to the mind, because when they hit another strike on our heat or power plants, and this huge wave of happiness starts to emerge in all social spheres, not only propagandists who get money for this, not only official figures who happily announce we destroyed another part of crucial infrastructure, as this Konashenkov likes to announce. Just look at all these different social groups who just sit there and are happy about inflicting pain and being evil. Hurrah! We destroyed it! Why? This is a symptom of an extremely weak and uneducated mass, because this is their only way of hurting us. They cannot do anything on the battlefield. They can't execute an offensive. They can only flood everything with cannon fodder and use cruise missiles with a range of over 1,000 kilometers and strike our infrastructure. On top of that, there is that story when one of their own missiles accidentally hit some abandoned farm on Russian territory where nobody was living. And they are telling the world, look at that, they are shooting on Russian territory. This is absolutely unacceptable. They even went to the United Nations with that complaint and said, recognize the impossibility of shooting the territory of Russia. They said that in all seriousness, while simultaneously striking all of our cities, all of them, not only critical infrastructure, but just residential areas in general. Take a look at Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, Kiev, Lvov, Ivano-Frankivsk, Zhytomyr, Zaporozhye, or any other of our cities. But when their own missile accidentally falls on an empty farm on their territory, they are demanding from the world, look at that. This is a classical behavior of a scared Gopnik, so let's treat them as such. The host asks, Mikhail, since you were talking about the topic of Gopniks, let's elaborate on that matter. Iran is supplying Russia with kamikaze drones and seems to prepare to send out a new load of them. How is it possible to influence this country so that they don't do this? This is a good question. This concerns an entire range of complex issues of global security. The process of sanctioning Iran is far from complete. Yes, Iran was sanctioned because of the development of nuclear technologies and so on. Yet simultaneously, there is a high effort in establishing some shady deals with the Iranian leadership. Maybe we could sign some kind of nuclear deal with them and find a solution, they say. The Iranian government doesn't care. They provide weapons for killing civilians, whether it is in Israel, through Syria and Hezbollah, or in Ukraine through Russia. This is the Iranian government. They have no morals like people like us. They just don't care. They like that they are able to help Russia to effectively destroy our crucial energy infrastructure. Since, as we know now, Russia doesn't own enough necessary long-range weapons, so Iranian drones are currently hitting crucial targets on our territory. So what has to be done with Iran? First of all, the world needs to stop playing some double game. Iran needs to be completely isolated. There shouldn't be any kind of international trade with that country. Apart from that, the components of these drones need to be carefully analyzed. It is clear that Iran doesn't produce those components. Other countries, through private companies, are helping to supply Iran with those components. Those companies need to be punished. This should be obvious. Furthermore, there are 4 factories that are producing these drones in Iran. These factories need to be targeted by precise missile strikes so that they will not be able to produce more of them. Not only the factory in Syria needs to be targeted. Actually, this is not even a factory, but a location from which the drones get prepared for their shipment to Russia and Hezbollah. Last but not least, our partners in Israel need to understand one simple, strategical, important thing. The loss of Russia in Ukraine will help to drastically decrease Russia's secret involvement and support of various terroristic organizations in the Middle East. This includes the so-called terror organization Hezbollah. This means that the amount of Russian financial funding for those organizations will be drastically decreased. Their ability to purchase weapon components through middlemen, such as, for example, Iran, will be decreased, which would decrease the amount of produced kamikaze drones and missiles. This would, of course, benefit the security of Israel and other countries. There is an obvious causality. So, what is needed? It is necessary for the leadership of Ukraine and other countries to discuss what needs to be done in regards to the production of Iranian drones and how it can be stopped. The next interview with Mikhail, which I decided to translate, was recorded on the 29th of October 2022, precisely 60 years since the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The host says, "Do you have any analogies between what is happening today and what happened during the peak of the Cuban Missile Crisis? I remind our viewers that during that time the world was on the edge of a nuclear war. Of course, there are analogies, but these underlying analogies are much deeper than one would think in regards to the Cuban Missile Crisis, apart from all the nuclear rhetoric that we hear nowadays. Because there are certain processes that are not completed, in this case, the disintegration of the Soviet ideology. And now we see an absurd rebirth of the Soviet ideology. This vicious ideology stands for dictating their will through the use of force, while simultaneously coming up with strange justifications for their absurd behavior, which are made up for the outside world. Back then, in 1991, there hasn't been found a long-term solution to the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is an excess that today, 6 decades later, still hasn't ended. This is an excess that started back then and is still ongoing, because the Russian Federation has never gone through all the necessary phases of rethinking their own role in that crisis and in general in all crises in which the Soviet Union had the initiative role. This particularly concerns their material and financial support of different institutions and authoritarian governments, like, for example, Iran, which is threatening the world with its potential use of nuclear weapons. These are all symptoms of an unfinished process. Unfortunately, Russia still has to go through the process of Desovietization. This is a term I chose for them since they seem to like terms that start with a D. So they need to go through this process of Desovietization, and issues as the nuclear rhetoric has been the favorite toy of the Soviet Union, and today we see that Russia has inherited this toy. The host says, "Mikhail, in regards to absurd ideologies, Putin today had a speech at the Valdai Forum, which, by the way, once was an international forum. The Kremlin has framed it as an outstanding historical speech that will be studied for years to come. One statement that was made was, humanity is at a turning point. We either keep collecting a load of problems which will crush us in the end, or we will find a solution together." Another quote was, "The West just went crazy and killed Qasem Soleimani, an Iranian general. And canceling the Russian culture in the world after the beginning of the special military operation is bad. And the best one, I have always believed in the power of common sense." So what exactly was that? Was he complaining, or is it how he is threatening? Neither this nor that. This was another manifestation of the fact that this person does not fit his position and that his view does not match the times we live in. Of course, they label his speech as historic and outstanding, just as all the speeches from the general secretaries of the CPSU at the Congress of the Soviet Communist Party were praised as historic back in the day. These speeches are similarly outstanding. Look, it is impossible for the Russian government to write truly outstanding speeches, especially for those kinds of speakers like Vladimir Putin. Those speeches will always seem weak and full of repetitions of the same claims that the West has done this and that the West is to blame for everything. This is just absurd. Every person who has at least a minimal level of intelligence and an outlook on what is happening can see what is truly happening. This situation is so obvious, black and white. It is very simple. There is this person who delivered that speech. His country has attacked Ukraine in 2014. His country, during all these years, has provoked Ukraine with countless bombardments and has made up all sorts of myths about some kind of alleged biolaboratories, nuclear bombs, and so on. His country at 4:30 in the morning has started to drop bombs on another sovereign territory and has done it with a maximum rate of violence. His country has sent rusty tanks to us, which were rolling all over Ukraine. The West or NATO had nothing to do with that. This isn't about some philosophical resistance against some kind of system. This is just a small person, small in various aspects, who is trying to raise up to the level of titans and giants and say, look, this is about a bipolar world order, a multilateral conflict, and a civilizational election. This person does not have a civilizational election on his side. All of these are just buzzwords that he uses in every single speech. And in a way, this is what makes them historic. Do you know why? Because when Putin's era will end, and it is already at its final stage, all his speeches will be collected and listed chronologically in some book, and there you will see that it has always been a repetition of the same kinds of topics and buzzwords. He doesn't even seem to notice how monotonous and primitive his speeches sound. You know, there have been some historical villains in the past who at least had the talent to justify what evil things they were doing, like Lenin, who he is for some reason often referring to. This person at least tried to explain why he ordered the execution of so many of his opponents. He at least provided some kind of philosophical worldview that justified his actions. But these guys can't even formulate a credible explanation on why he is giving the order to destroy all the energy infrastructure of an entire country while talking about the wrongdoings of some other NATO states. He is not threatening us. To treat this as a threat does not make any sense. He does not try to come forward into some sort of decent state in order to start any sort of acceptable negotiation process because he doesn't even know what decency means. He does not offer any alternative, and everything that he is saying is absolutely senseless and will end as soon as he will end. This whole Valdai Forum is very similar to the meeting of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union back in the day, and similar to them, as soon as the leadership will leave the stage, which will happen sooner rather than later, all these presented topics will be perceived as outdated and old-fashioned very quickly, as some sort of slightly more absurd retro USSR copy.